Today's presenters will be Gus Cicala, President and CEO of Project Assistance, Jim Colton, Practice Director of Portfolio and Project Management, and Pat Richards, Chief Geek, Delivery Execution. I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Gus Cicala founded Project Assistance in 1996 with the goal of transforming our clients' approach to portfolio and project management to achieve a standard of excellence in execution that consistently delivers expected project outcomes. A recognized portfolio and project management expert, Gus is a published author of many popular articles and books on the subject of project management, and he is frequently asked to present and teach topics of interest around project and portfolio management. Gus?
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, everybody, for being here today. First thing I'd like to cover is just a brief overview of our agenda, which has somehow disappeared. Okay. So I'll talk about, today we're going to talk about the challenges in solution methodologies that adapt to ever-changing customer needs. We'll go through a conceptual overview of the solution, and then we're going to have a real-life case study, a demonstration, and discuss a little bit about practical methods for change. So the first thing we want to talk about are the challenges that are inherent in methodology and process development and rollout and maintenance. And to that end, in general, the challenges have to do with how do you get a complete methodology built and rolled out to a large audience and have it be complete and have it be maintainable. And some of the detailed challenges underneath that go to, for example, accessing subject matter experts to build a methodology. Like any other project, the methodology development project is typically challenged by having subject matter experts whose primary job is not to support the development of methodology. There may be a PMO or some other organization that's responsible for rolling out methodology, but typically there are subject matter experts within many different parts of the organization that need to be tapped to bring that content in, and having their access and availability can be a real challenge. Methodologies change over time, so a lot of times methodologies are what I call monolithic. I like that term, or maybe I don't like that term, because monolithic means one stone, which implies a solid blob of information. So a lot of methodologies, while they may be accessible in a portal and in online situations, oftentimes are still built from some fairly thick documents with a lot of the components of methodology sort of stuffed inside of that. Related to that same monolithic concept is the idea of how you get different views or reference points into a methodology. So methodologies like to be viewed sometimes by phase, sometimes by deliverable, sometimes by role, and many other examples that we'll talk about later on in our presentation today. There's also a vast array of offerings in methodology and workflows that are often needed for different solutions. So we'll talk about some more examples of that when we get into the conceptual overview. But this idea that there's more than one workflow, more than one pathway to a methodology, and the fact that there's oftentimes reusable components within those methodologies can create challenges to create all those different variations. And again, that idea of the common elements leads to redundancies and overlap within the model itself, and many times becomes one of the major challenges to really having that vast array of offerings, methods, and workflows to even get developed for the first time. A lot of methodologies get distributed with what I call the worst case scenario. If it's a software development methodology, the worst case scenario might be a large custom application development, and so we see this method get distributed, and then maybe a request that if you're running a smaller project, that you justify deleting some parts of it instead of actually giving you a small custom workflow. And then once these things are developed, the maintenance has a ripple effect throughout the method content, meaning that having this large methodology built for the first time can be challenging enough, but to keep it up to date over time becomes an even more significant challenge. Again, reassembling the subject matter experts, having those reusable components, if they change, to be reflected in each of those variations of the workflows. And so therefore, that ripple effect oftentimes creates a barrier to ongoing maintenance. And so what I want to talk about conceptually is, a comparison to how the universe was formed, right? We have a periodic table of elements here that shows the basic building blocks of the world that we live in, okay? And you can generate the entire world of outputs from this small periodic table of elements that exist every place in the universe. So, how can we sort of reconfigure these building blocks and start to build them up from scratch? So one idea we might look at, for example, would be an amino acid, one of the basic building blocks of life on this planet, and we suspect on other planets. So from these 4 basic components of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, we can combine them in basically thousands or in potentially millions permutations of different configurations. So, for example, when we start to put these amino acids together, they make proteins which build into DNA, which build the basic building blocks of life. So, a human being or any other living organism can come from one single cell with one string of DNA and make the entire organism, and also proliferate throughout the entire race or the entire species. So when we get the DNA made up from these basic nucleotides, from those 4 components that make up what they call the double helix, we see here just on our planet the many different kingdoms and phyla and genus and species that come out of those basic building blocks. So again, the analogy is how do you take some basic building blocks and make these myriad of different views of how it all comes together? So in summary, from those 4 components, we can build a basic organic molecule that can make up the double helix of DNA, that can make up all the life that we have on this planet, and as we suspect throughout the universe. Okay, so conceptually, a dynamic methods workflow does the same thing, right? So when we talk about methods workflow, how can we turn methodologies into the various workflows that those methods are used in, and how do we make it dynamic? And so one thing we want to do is have it adaptable by role, by phase, by deliverable, okay? And over time, and oftentimes what happens with methodologies is the best version that ever comes out is the first one that's released. And day 1 after release, day 2 after release, week 1, month 1, quarter 1, year 1, those methodologies have a tendency to decay, or really to separate from the reality of what's happening in the real world versus what was developed a day, a month, a week, a year ago. So over time, we see this decay. And this idea that we're putting forth today is this idea of mass customization. How do we take a number of components and be able to reconfigure them? And if you see the picture of Michael Dell here, because that was really the original Dell model, right? For years, they thrived on this approach of, you can have your computer configured however you want with all the various components. So as some of you may recall going back that far, when you bought an XT or an AT or some of the original computers that went out there, you really didn't have a lot of choices. It came with what it came with. And a lot of methodologies kind of come that way too. What's in the box is what you get, and if you want to change it, you have to change it yourself. So here's an example. I mentioned kind of a worst case scenario. Here's what we might view as a high-level, large customization or large application development methodology that shows some major activities under the discover phase, under the design phase, under build, under deploy, and under operate. And so from this master methodology, oftentimes come the variations of, for example, one variation we might look at is software package selection and implementation. Okay, and they use a common set of processes, tasks, deliverables, and roles in software package selection and implementation, as we might see in a large custom application development methodology. Same is true for infrastructure design and build. We would see some common elements there, which we'll show in detail in a minute. Small development projects, proof of concept projects that don't even go through full development. So these are just a small sampling of the variations we might see from that large monolithic custom application development workflow. So to take an example, if I were to take a subset called small development from this large group of phases and major processes, what I might do is use some of the requirements, processes, and deliverables. I might use some of the design elements, and I might use some of the development elements, and we see here some of the deliverables. But again, that's a different workflow, but using common elements from the large custom methodology. Another example we might see is a proof of concept. Again, we're using some of the requirements elements, in this case only high-level requirements. From a design standpoint, maybe not doing detailed design, just high level. And from a development standpoint, stopping at a proof of concept, which might be a small amount of development work, but not all the things that we would see in a fully blown custom application development effort. So the question really becomes, how do you start to render these different views through a workflow, the different reference points from by deliverable, by phase, by task, by role, into a development methodology that allows itself to vary through these different views. So different users need different information from the methodology. So the way we describe this is really four major process areas for this solution. We talk about collect, and then store, and then read and render. So the idea of collecting the information, storing it in a data model, and then being able to read and render it from those different reference points gives you that flexibility to use common elements and build them up from the bottom. So we can do tasks by process, we can do deliverables by role, we can do deliverables by phase, and any other variation you want. So what you really get is a view of the methodology isn't this monolithic view. It's actually a report, if you will. I can go into a data store that's been collected and stored, and I can read that information. I can render it through this various different views that you see here on the screen. Okay, so in summary, we see here mass customization of sneakers, which is a common idea, right? But this idea of assembling to order from a methodology approach, to be able to assemble a workflow through a specific type of project that brings together those common elements. So it enables a custom delivery solution that can quickly be pulled together from a master methodology inventory, if you will, and organizations can quickly respond to the changes because what's happening? Well, if I have a new workflow, a new view through the methodology, I may have 90% or more, in some cases, of those basic elements already stored, and what I do is I just put different wrappers around it. So we'll talk about those examples and show you some examples. So the first thing we want to do is introduce Pat Richards from NCR to talk about a case study of how this methodology was used. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change presentations here. And hopefully you're seeing my screen, which is introducing eCubed. And Pat, I think we can hear you. Are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Okay. Welcome, Pat.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. And let me say that, you know, what was just described is exactly the process that we went through at NCR in adopting our global methodology to address our specific business problems, which we're going to get into in this presentation. So if we can go to the next slide. So a little background on NCR. Most of you out there have touched NCR in the last day, almost certainly. If you've checked out at any retail establishment, gotten money from an ATM, or been on a plane and used an electronic boarding pass, all of those are services that we offer through our facility, our hardware, our software, and our professional service engagements. So the challenges for us are enormous. We have a large number of consultants worldwide, over 2,000. We typically do 6,500-ish projects during a year. Lots of customers, lots of different types of projects in different industries across the board. So from everything from hosting facilities to providing outsourcing services to providing transactional loyalty messaging type services. Next slide. So we're compounding that as we're in 54 different countries worldwide. As you can see by this breakdown, the North American geo is the largest, but not by much. EMEA and Europe are very, very close to the same size for us and drive significant business for us across there. And again, compound our challenges on what we have to deal with methodology-wise. So the challenges that we were facing is dealing with, we are in 4 major industries: banking, retail, travel, government services, providing consistent roles and definitions across all those industries and all the types of services that we have, having a consistent approach and terminology so that members from teams can move to different teams and we can make use of assets developed in different areas. We've also been very aggressive recently in mergers and acquisitions. We spent over $2 billion in the last 4 years acquiring different software companies to add to our overall suite of offerings. And we simply need to leverage our best practices across all areas, particularly in the security areas, which are obviously crucial for what we do. And like any business, we're always striving to improve our revenue and margins and improve efficiencies. So our take on our delivery model is what we call E-cubed. E-cubed stands for envision, execute, and enhance, which are kind of the major segments of our methodology, which we then break down into the segments of pre-sales, strategy, discovery, design, build, deploy, and optimize. We represent this as a circle because we're obviously interested in continuing on to the next stage. Once you solve problem A, then problem B pops up, et cetera. So why did we need this? And again, it's fundamentally to develop consistency, to allow us to leverage our people better, our process and technology better, to bring professionalism to professional services. When we have groups in very segmented markets, bringing the standards to them across the way, collect all the knowledge that we're bringing together. Like any large organization, communications is a continuum problem, so speaking the same language and driving to the same set of work products helps us address that. Next slide. It's also a big part of our internal transformation. We have many professional services regions. As I mentioned earlier, we have lots of different line of businesses divided along 4 different major industries. We also have software maintenance and support needs, global offerings. We do our own cloud services for hosting, and we do strategic business consulting as well. So intertwining all those threads to come up with an integrated solution was what we wanted to accomplish to deliver true value to our customers. Next slide. So this is a high-level representation of our take on the methodology. And as I mentioned earlier, we divided into the major sections of envision, execute, and enhance. Project management obviously exists throughout the engagement, and we wanted to include not only what most people consider the pure delivery side of things, which is the discover, design, build, and deploy phase, but also the pre-sales and strategy, and then the ongoing relationship with the customer in the optimizing phase. So, as in any good methodology, not every project does every one of these type of things, but this is, kind of the master menu from which then we use the tool to select the appropriate component parts for the project that we're working on. Next slide. So this is just a little bit of representation of the internal setup that we worked with project assistants to develop, where we've broken up and automated the storage of the different components in the method. So as we really use work products in different phases, we always refer to the same master. We don't have the duplication process that is typical in a lot of methodologies to make sure that all of them are updated when you make changes to any of them. Identifying the different roles that people do, the policies, who owns what, training techniques, et cetera, is all very critical for us in getting not only the methodology out there, but the appropriate training for our professionals and resources to allow them to actually execute on it as well. So benefits that we've seen is obviously as a team member, it's effective interaction, accountability for the role. They know what the role they're supposed to be doing. They know what the expectations are. They have template documents that are associated with what they're supposed to do. And we also have recommended training associated with each one of those steps so that people can move forward and make sure that they know what they're doing. Within a team, again, it simply allows us to ramp up faster because we know what the expectations are for each other, and we know the process that we're going to proceed through. With sales, we're able to actually articulate our value prop a lot clearer, explain how we're going to work with the customer and what they can expect when. And it also helps us to enable a true partnership arrangement and becoming a trusted advisor with our customer, not just a vendor. I think that might be it. Yep.
Okay, thanks, Pat. So thank you very much, Pat. I appreciate the presentation. And now what we're going to do is we're going to demonstrate a component of it, of this solution. And at this point, I'd like to introduce our practice director, Jim Colton.
Thank you, Gus. Appreciate it. And Pat, appreciate your kind of the case study there that you walked through. So I'm going to walk through the tool that was used to support the methodology content. And as Pat mentioned earlier on one of his slides, there's two major components to the application itself. One is the end user perspective, where folks on project teams can go in and get their view of the method for the project that they're working on. The second major function in the tool is the kind of the content owner or method administration backend, where the content gets loaded, which then can be read and rendered, as Gus described it earlier, by the end users. So the view you're looking at right now is the end user view. This is actually our delivery method that we utilize in our projects as project assistants as a consulting firm. So we have a three-phase base method. You can see vision, implement, and adopt. And we also have an associated concurrent project management method that you can see on the top strip here. So like most professional services organizations, we have different offerings. So if I have a client that's looking at just a strategy or a visioning, I can select my visioning approach. I can hit go. And we see a three-phase visioning method. So this is a subset, again, of our overall method, but it's strictly for the strategic portion of the project. And we've broken this visioning offering into current state, future state, and roadmap. We might have other offerings. You could have, basically an unlimited number of offerings that you build on the back end and then display here, all with reusable parts. So we may have a custom development project for a client. I can quickly, hit custom build and hit go, and you can see our 5-phase methodology for building custom applications. And as Gus mentioned earlier, we may have a small application enhancement. It's not a full custom build project, but there's some basic activities that we want to use. So I can build a small custom build method and then display it to the end user. The way this is laid out is basically the structure is phase, process, task. So there's 3 levels of the method. Requirements would be a phase. If I click on requirements, I can see the details, the processes that are used. Let me go back to VIA to give you a little bit better picture, since this is more of the full-blown method. So if I click on the vision phase here, I can see all the activities or processes listed down the left-hand side. The way we set this up, I can have inputs. So what's required is an input to this process in order to execute it. I can see the specific task that I execute within this process, and I can drill down to see even more detail. I can see the output of this process, the deliverable. And I can set this up so I can link to templates or techniques or various training material that I want to utilize within that process. So I want to understand a a specific technique, I can create a link, in this case to SharePoint, and access a template. This is fully customizable. So in our view of the world, we have these attributes that are part of the process. We have estimating considerations, items that we should consider when we're putting together a proposal. And we have exit criteria, which, basically how do you know when you're finished with this process? The way this is architected, we have roles and responsibilities. So you set this up in the back end, and you can view it on this front end as an end user. So we put the individuals that are involved in this process and what their specific role is. So again, this is fully configurable, customizable, based on the attributes that are important, to your organization from a methodology perspective. You can see how you can, quickly navigate through the method, through each phase. You can drill down to the process level, etc. Now, the beauty of having a relational database as a back end is when I make a change to any process, task, deliverable, that change will cascade through all the different variations or workflows of the methodology. So I'm going to go into kind of the back end, the content owner side of this, and show you how the stuff gets developed. So now I'm in here. I'm a content owner. I own the methodology. Typically, there's a small number of individuals within the organization that would have this role, and you may set up a committee to approve changes to the method, but all the changes can quickly be made on the back end through this content owner screen. Basically, the 4 steps that are required to build a new offering or method are showed here: step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, starting with your base data. So you start with entering techniques or training or job aids. So if I want to add a new job aid, I enter the name of the job aid. I identify, is that a sample or is it a template? Quickly put the job description, and then I put the name of the document and a link. So it's fairly quick to add new job aids, new training material, new techniques, and then you can associate those to the activities. So when I add a new activity as the next step, you'll see where I can quickly add the techniques just by clicking on the technique, selecting it, and basically then I've got that, that technique will be displayed on the end user side. So we built this on a relational data model, so there's certain kind of, I'll call it methodology, business rules that are enforced as you build the method. For example, if I go to add a new task, I select the activity as a task type. I have to associate that task to a process. So it enforces the structure of the method that's been defined by the organization. So I go add the task, and I can associate it quickly to a process, and I can fill out the remaining content and save it. Third step in the process is adding a deliverable. You can see the list of deliverables. They're easily sorted if you want to find one and modify it. If I want to add a new one, come into the deliverable screen. I put the name of the deliverable. Basically, is this a final deliverable, meaning it's associated to a process, or is it an intermediate deliverable? Is it associated to a task? I can then add the different roles. So as a PA consultant, I'm accountable for this deliverable. I add that, and then I associate it to a process. So each deliverable must get associated to a specific process. It's an output of that process. You can see kind of the business rules being enforced as I add a new deliverable. And finally, and most importantly, is where you actually build the various versions of the methodology. So you can see here, I'll go into the visioning, and basically, as a professional services company, as I go through the sales cycle, I'm determining what my client or customer wants as an output. And based on those specific deliverables that are required to meet the solution, I can assimilate those building blocks and build a methodology. So on our visioning method, you can see the current state, future state, and roadmap. If I want to add a fourth phase, let's call it optimize, I can select the various deliverables for that phase. Add that deliverable to the phase, and now you'll see it here on the content owner side. When I hit save, if all went well, we're going to see that end user view when I go back to the end user. So I'm going to click on the end user, go to visioning, I had to refresh my screen there, but you can see what was a three-phase methodology with 4 deliverables is now a 4-phase methodology with 5 deliverables. So that's kind of the power of what we call the dynamic methodology workflow, where I can quickly go in and customize an existing method or add a new one based on the specific needs of my customers. It could be internal customers for IT organizations, where you're adapting your custom build methodology to do, like Gus had mentioned, a proof of concept or a small build or an enhancement. Or for professional services organizations, it could be an entirely different offering that you're providing, but you're just modifying something that's already existing. So that's a quick run through of methodology, both from an end user perspective and the back end, the content owner perspective. So appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Jim.
I'm going to hand it back to Gus.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
You got it.
We go back to the slide deck now. So we went through a case study, went through a demonstration, and now we want to just talk about a practical method for change. So the question now is, how do you get something like this implemented? And as Jim mentioned, the methodology that we recommend is, an idea of having some vision of what the processes, technology, people and organization, and governance need to be in order for an organization to embrace methodology, whether it's software development lifecycle, whether it's construction management, whether it's, putting man on the moon. Usually there's 2 layers of process. There's project management at the execution layer, and there's the actual build methodology. So there's this question about, how will methodology be used? And so the activities are to think about what's the current state of the process, what's the future state, how far off is the organization today from where it needs to get to, and what's the vision for the future, which essentially a roadmap is sort of a nice word for a project plan at the end of the day, right? So what is the plan to bring an organization into the use of a methodology, so that we would know what the current state is, what the vision is, and what the plan is to get there, such that when it comes time to implement a tool like this, we can focus more on when we look at process technology, people and governance, that we can get more down to what is the requirement of the methodology, what is the process that's going to be developed, or if you have the luxury of having some kind of a process that maybe you haven't been able to collect, store, and read and render dynamically like we're showing today, how could you sort of harvest that intellectual property and get it rendered into a tool like this? There's obviously some tool configuration and customization and some education to the end user. And as you saw what Jim did today, it's a pretty basic web-based solution that has a strong intuitive approach. And most of the work is actually on the administrators to bring this stuff together. From an end user standpoint, it's a matter of using, it's almost like, do you need instructions to use a website, or do you know where to click when you're trying to do something? So once that solution is implemented, the question then becomes, what's the adoption going to be for the methodology? Clearly, implementing a piece of technology like this doesn't guarantee the adoption of that technology. So we view this as kind of the most de-emphasized and most important phase of this, what we call VIA approach, the vision, implement, and adopt. And fundamentally, what this boils down to is, again, looking at process, technology, people, and organization, but focusing on activities that are geared towards process improvement, ongoing operations, and governance. And this comes down to the old adage, what gets measured gets managed. And so the question now becomes, how do you measure the effectiveness of methodology? How do you ensure that if you're putting a project management methodology out there, or a software development lifecycle methodology, or even, in a case like what Pat's describing at NCR, when you have that many different countries and that many different languages and that many different solutions, how do you drive that adoption? And the question really becomes, what is that governance process going to look like? What is the audit, oversight, reporting, roll-up to the management team going to look like, such that when it's done, we end up with an adopted solution? So in summary, we're talking about the decentralization at some level of subject matter expertise. You see the administration of how these components can be put together with the security model. Some of this can be decentralized. And certainly, Jim mentioned a committee that might want to review and approve content coming into the solution, but at least the basic development of methodology can be decentralized. So bringing together those multiple components with the decentralized subject matter experts, you can come up with a comprehensive methodology, right? So the idea here is, how do you make it adaptable once you have the methodology? How do we quickly modify an approach based on customer needs? And Jim showed a great example of adding an optimization after adoption in our VIA methodology that was done very dynamically, right? And can use existing components, or can add new components to a methodology. We can look at that methodology by role if we want, right? So we have different ways to put it in, record once and render endlessly, right? So I can, again, look at it by phase, by deliverable, by role, all those different various ways. And so it's, because it's on the web, this thing can be accessed from pretty much anywhere, any device. And the speed to adoption is really what this is all about, right? So if you can get it built quickly, it can be ready quickly to be rolled out to a larger team and ready for use. So in terms of next steps, we'll make this recording available. We have on our website, we have a place for videos, so you'll see this show up as a video. If you want to share this with somebody, it'll be out there. Our value proposition is to provide solutions like this that help deliver projects better, faster, more cost-effective. And our methodology, our VIA methodology, reduces risks. It gets return on investment early, which leads to speeding the realization of value, and ultimately drives effective organizational change. So the adoption piece is important. And so we have a number of practices here, and not going to go through them one by one, but this is sort of a summary of our solutions. And so in terms of what's happening today, there is a brand new website for Project Assistance that was recently launched. And so you see the homepage there, or at least one of the panels from the homepage. So the content is a lot easier to get to. There is a lot of content out there if you're interested in some of the learning videos we have, some of the blog posts. There's information about our offerings. Pretty soon you'll see some information about the new book that's coming out, which is Project Management Using Microsoft Project 2013. It's both a training and reference guide, and also the tool we talked about today also is available. So there's some contact information here if you want to send an email, if you want to make a phone call. If you want to go to our events page, which I mentioned, which is where today's webinar will be posted, so projectassistance.com/events. Okay, and at this point, we have a few minutes for questions and answers. As Daniel pointed out at the beginning of the presentation, we do have a console that's there for asking questions.
All right, thank you, Gus. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Pat. And we do actually already have one question that came in. What's the basic architecture of the solution?
Okay, yeah, the basic architecture is it's a .NET framework, so it's a Microsoft platform. On the back end, I mean, certainly from the front end, it's rendered as a web page. But in terms of assembling the methodology, it's a .NET application. The data that's collected goes into a SQL Server data store, and the rendering occurs to a web layer. So that's kind of the basic technology. It's offered on-premise now, in the cloud to be coming soon. And I actually have a question from Jim. Jim, you said that there was a component that you wanted to...
Yeah, since we have a couple minutes, I just quickly wanted to show one other thing that might be interesting to everyone. We talked about the deliverable by role, looking at different views of the method. So we've implemented this for ourselves. So if I'm looking at the VIA methodology here, and I want to see as an engagement manager what my role is on that project, I can quickly get a view of that in this screen here. So I'm responsible for certain deliverables, I'm accountable for others, I'm consulted on others. If I want to see, provisioning, what are my responsibilities? Well, there's a lot less. So this is dynamically being built based on the method content. So you can see kind of the power of just one simple way to look through the methodology. And again, as we make the change on the back end, that change cascades throughout all the different variations of your methodology. So I can select, I can go in and I can select all roles on this type of project. So I can see what everyone's doing at a glance. Or again, I can select an individual. Well, what's my executive sponsor doing? So I just wanted to share that. Again, these different types of views can be configured based on your needs, but this one here is deliverable by role, which I think is a pretty powerful view into the method.
Thanks, Jim. Did we have any other questions come in there?
That's all the questions we have. Thank you for joining us today. We will have this recording available, as we covered earlier, both on the the video section of Project Assistance webpage, under Events on Project Assistance webpage, and also on YouTube. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope to see you at future events.
Thank you, Dan.